April 1942. The Burma Road had been cut, Rangoon fallen, and the last Allied convoys into China halted in choking dust. Japanese columns surged through northern Burma, severing the lifeline that had kept Chiang Kai-shek's armies supplied. For Washington, the collapse was more than regional. If China fell, Japanese divisions would redeploy to the Pacific. Roosevelt wrote bluntly to his generals, "The road to Tokyo must not be a one-way street." From Delhi to Chongqing, the question echoed, how to resupply an ally now isolated behind enemy lines. The answer, when it came, was audacious, bordering on impossible. Build a new road. Not south through Burma's rice plains, already in enemy hands. Not by sea, blocked by Japanese fleets. Instead, cut a supply artery through the unmapped jungles and mountains of northern Burma, starting from a railhead in Ledo, Assam. The order filtered down in April 1942. Officially, it was a directive from the combined chiefs of staff, endorsed by Roosevelt and Churchill. Unofficially, it was a sentence handed to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Colonel Lewis A. Pick, a hard-driving Missourian who had built dams on the Missouri River, was summoned to headquarters. Stilwell, his superior, put it plainly, "Pick, you're going to build me a road, from India to China, through hell." The challenge defied precedent. Terrain maps showed mountains rising to 4,000 feet, valleys drowned in monsoon floods, jungles so dense that visibility dropped to 5 yards. The Chindwin and Hukong valleys, malaria zones since colonial times, bred Anopheles mosquitoes by the billions. British administrators warned that no modern road had ever crossed this ground.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Pick's reply was curt. "Then, we'll build the first." At Ledo, the starting point, the first American bulldozers unloaded from rail cars in December 1942. The air was thick with leeches, rain squalls, and the sour smoke of cooking fires from hastily built camps. The men, many fresh from farms and workshops in the Midwest, found themselves ankle-deep in red clay that clung to boots like cement. One GI wrote in his diary, "We are supposed to carve a highway to China. Today, it took us 3 hours to carve 50 feet of ditch." Numbers defined the task before a single foot of gravel was laid. To sustain the project, 15,000 American soldiers assigned, chiefly from the 45th Engineered General Service Regiment and supporting medical, signal, and quartermaster units. 35,000 local and Chinese laborers recruited or conscripted, armed with shovels, baskets, and machetes. Machinery, 300 Caterpillar D8 bulldozers, graders, cranes, and trucks, shipped halfway around the world. Medical provisions, quinine, atabrine, and entire field hospitals, because engineers here faced not just mud and stone, but malaria, dysentery, typhus, and cholera. The Japanese watched with interest. Captured diaries of the 18th Division later revealed that officers considered the idea absurd. Americans attempt to drive iron carriages into the jungle. They will bury themselves in mud before they reach Burma. But Washington insisted. Chiang Kai-shek insisted. And Stilwell, contemptuous of defeatism, drove his men mercilessly. The Chinese army can fight if fed. To feed them, give me the road. By spring 1943, the first survey parties cut lines through bamboo groves and elephant grass. The engineers carried rifles slung across their shoulders. Japanese patrols were never far. Heat reached 110 degrees. Engines overheated, then seized. Bulldozer crews stripped to the waist, their bodies streaked with mud and mosquito bites. Still, Footage preserved in the U.S. National Archives shows machines inching forward, steel blades forcing paths where no wheel had turned before. For the men, the order remained half legend, half death sentence. We are ordered to build a road to China, through mountains, jungle, disease, through hell itself. If we do it, the war may be shorter. If we fail, no one will remember our names. By the summer of 1943, the first 20 miles stretched eastward from Ledo, an unpaved scar of red clay carved against impossible odds. The world barely noticed, yet for those inside the jungle, it was proof that the order was real. The road had begun.
January 19, 1943, Ledo, Assam. The town was little more than a railhead and a cluster of tin-roofed huts when the first American engineers arrived. The monsoon season had left the ground a swamp. Red clay turned to knee-deep muck after every rainfall. Trucks sank to their axles. Tents collapsed under constant downpour. And soldiers wrote letters home describing a world that is nothing but mud and mosquitoes. Yet here, in this forgotten corner of India, the U.S. Army would build the launching pad of its boldest engineering project in the Pacific Theater. Colonel Lewis Pick wasted no time. A river engineer by training, Pick treated the jungle like a river in flood, something to be forced, contained, and mastered. He summoned bulldozer operators, surveyors, and quartermasters with the same clipped phrase, "Get it done." His orders, preserved in Corps of Engineers records, reveal his philosophy. Speed mattered more than perfection. A road that exists, even if rough, beats a perfect road on paper, he told his staff. The task began with logistics. Lockheed was building P-38 Lightnings back in California at a rate of one every 90 minutes. But here, in Assam, even a bag of cement required 3 weeks' transport by rail from Calcutta. Quartermaster files show that by February 1943, more than 5,000 tons of supplies, bulldozers, spare parts, fuel drums, tents, food, and medical equipment crowded the Ledo rail yards. It was organized chaos, guarded day and night against theft and sabotage. Machinery became the heart of the enterprise. The Caterpillar D8 bulldozer, weighing 20 tons, was the real weapon of the campaign. Engineers called it the tank of the jungle. Where elephants once dragged logs for British planters, the D8 carved swaths through bamboo thickets. Film reels from the U.S. National Archives show shirtless operators perched on their machines, mud flying from spinning tracks, the jungle slowly giving way to a path wide enough for trucks. Still, machines alone couldn't conquer Assam. The workforce included nearly 35,000 Indian and Burmese laborers, plus 15,000 Chinese soldiers sent by Chiang Kai-shek to assist. American engineers supervised, but most of the backbreaking labor, hauling gravel in baskets, felling trees with hand axes, and carrying fuel cans fell to these men. British colonial officials provided elephants, whose massive strength helped drag bridge timbers into place and pull stuck trucks from mud pits. One officer later remarked, "We fought the jungle with caterpillars and elephants together." Disease hit harder than the Japanese. Army medical records reveal malaria rates as high as 80% in some units during early construction. Quinine and atabrine were distributed daily, but soldiers resisted the bitter taste. "The pill keeps you yellow," one GI joked, referring to the skin discoloration caused by atabrine. Yet those who skipped doses often ended up in the field hospital with high fevers, hallucinations, or worse. Dysentery and jungle rot added to the misery. The Japanese threat remained real. Patrols from the 18th Division moved along Burma's northern frontier, probing Allied positions. 13th Fighter Command reported occasional skirmishes where survey crews stumbled into Japanese scouts. Colonel Pick ordered his men to carry rifles beside their shovels. "We build by day and guard by night," a private wrote in his diary. Despite hardship, progress came. By June 1943, the first 20 miles of roadway stretched out from Ledo, rutted, muddy, but real. Trucks carried gravel forward, widening the scar into a supply artery. American war correspondents visiting the site marveled at the determination. "They are building a road through what geographers once called impenetrable," one dispatch read. The soldiers themselves measured success more simply, in feet gained, in miles opened, in meals eaten without rain dripping into the mess tin. In a letter home preserved in the National World War II Museum, Corporal Jack Morrison wrote, "Every yard we cut feels like stealing a secret from the jungle. The trees don't want us here. The mud doesn't want us here. But the colonel says the road will go through, and so it does." By the end of 1943, the Ledo project was no longer a rumor or a desperate idea. It was an iron fact. A new artery was taking shape, inch by inch, across ground no road had ever claimed. The Victory Road, as soldiers began calling it, had begun in mud and machinery at Ledo.
June 1943. Assam's skies darkened, and the jungle swallowed the engineers. The monsoon had come, and with it, the greatest enemy the Ledo Road would ever face: water. For 5 months, rain poured without mercy, turning every ditch into a torrent and every hill into a landslide. Meteorological records preserved in the U.S. Army archives note that some areas received 140 inches of rainfall between June and October, among the heaviest in the world. The first casualties of the season were the roads themselves. Freshly cut stretches disintegrated overnight. Clay embankments sloughed away, gravel beds washed downstream, and bridges buckled under swollen rivers. One Corps of Engineers after-action report described it bluntly: "In monsoon, the road is not built once, it is built again and again." Bulldozers labored waist-deep in muck, their engines drowning as water rose around them. Operators wrapped ponchos over their heads, squinting through sheets of rain. Human endurance was tested daily. Soldiers lived in perpetual dampness. Uniforms never dried, boots rotted within weeks, and tents sagged under constant downpour. Army medical units reported fungal infections that peeled skin from between toes, a condition known as jungle rot. Latrines overflowed, spreading dysentery. Mosquitoes multiplied in stagnant water, carrying malaria into every work camp. Records from the 48th Evacuation Hospital in Assam show more men laid up with fever than at their bulldozers. Yet work never stopped. Colonel Pick's order, "The road must go through," echoed through the camps. To keep supplies moving forward, engineers innovated. They crushed local stone and mixed it with laterite clay, creating a crude but resilient surface. Bamboo mats were woven and laid under truck tracks to prevent sinking. On steep slopes, teams drilled holes for dynamite, blasting away unstable rock that threatened to bury the roadway. The monsoon turned construction into combat, a daily fight against Earth itself. Native laborers and Chinese troops bore the brunt of the suffering. Many worked stripped to shorts, their skin coated in mud as they hauled gravel in baskets or pushed stranded trucks with bare hands. Diaries from U.S. engineers describe watching Chinese soldiers collapse from exhaustion, only to rise again when ordered forward by their officers. "They had no choice," wrote one American sergeant. "They built with us, shoulder to shoulder, in rain that never ended." Bridges became lifelines. The Ledo Road would eventually require over 100 major bridges and thousands of culverts. During the 1943 monsoon, temporary spans of bamboo and timber often washed away within hours. Engineers turned to Bailey bridges, prefabricated steel trusses shipped from Britain, assembling them like giant erector sets under hostile skies. In one celebrated case, a Bailey bridge across the Tirap River was rebuilt 3 times in a single month after monsoon floods ripped it out. The Japanese saw opportunity in the weather. Patrols slipped across swollen rivers, probing the flanks of American work crews. 13th Fighter Command records describe air alerts over Assam as Japanese bombers tested defenses, though most strikes missed their mark. Still, snipers occasionally harassed survey teams. One Chinese soldier's diary entry, later captured and translated, reads, "We build with rifle at side, shovel in hand. The enemy is near, but the rain is nearer." Morale wavered. Letters home from GIs speak of despair, of endless days when progress seemed impossible. Yet there were also flashes of humor. Soldiers carved rain gauges from tin cans, betting on daily totals. Others fished in roadside puddles, hauling out small carp that swam across the worksite. "If the army could eat mudfish, we'd never go hungry," joked one corporal. By October 1943, the monsoon began to break. Clear skies revealed the work accomplished despite the deluge. A rough but continuous stretch of road now ran nearly 80 miles from Ledo, through swamps, over ridges, and across rivers once thought impassable. A 13th Fighter Command debrief noted, "The road exists, imperfect, battered, but alive." The monsoon had tested men and machines to the limit, but it had also proven something vital. The jungle could be beaten. Every washed-out bridge rebuilt, every mile carved anew, hardened the resolve of the engineers. Victory would not come quickly, but it would come by persistence. As Colonel Pick told his staff in a drenched tent meeting that fall, "The rain thinks it has us beaten, but when the clouds break, the road will still be here."
November 1943. The monsoon clouds lifted, and with them came the next challenge, the Patkai Range, a wall of jungle-covered mountains separating Assam from northern Burma. Rising to over 4,000 feet, the Patkai had been called impassable by British surveyors for decades. Even elephants struggled to find footing on the steep ridges. Now American engineers were told to carve a highway across it, wide enough for two-way truck traffic, durable enough for tanks and convoys, and finished fast enough to matter. Colonel Lewis Pick surveyed the terrain from a ridge near Ningkanj. What he saw was a nightmare: razor-backed hills, ravines dropping hundreds of feet, and slopes that slid like soapstone after rain. "We'll blast through it," he told his staff, according to Corps of Engineers records. And blast they did. Dynamite became as common as shovels. Teams drilled charges into rock faces, detonating them in thunderclaps that echoed through the jungle. Landslides often buried the work immediately after, forcing crews to dig out again. In one report, an engineer quipped, "Every mountain we knock down seems determined to stand right back up." Progress was measured in yards per day. The bulldozer remained king, but on the Patkai, men often had to go where machines could not. Chinese soldiers attached to the project by Chiang Kai-shek's order hacked trails by hand. Indian laborers carried gravel in baskets on their backs, climbing ladders made of bamboo. At night, torchlight flickered along the ridgelines as crews worked around the clock. Bridges grew taller and bolder. The road demanded structures across rivers like the Tairap and the Nam Yang, where swollen waters thundered beneath ravines. The Bailey Bridge again proved indispensable. Prefabricated steel panels, carried up mountains by mule and manpower, were bolted together into spans that could hold trucks within hours. One after-action report from the 330th Engineer Regiment notes proudly, "Bridge complete in 72 hours, despite enemy shelling and landslides." The Japanese had not been idle. Patrols from the 18th Division shadowed the road builders, occasionally ambushing survey teams. 13th Fighter Command logs record air skirmishes over the Patkai passes in late 1943, with P-40s and P-38s intercepting Japanese K-43 Oscars. On the ground, Japanese snipers forced engineers to carry rifles while they worked. Colonel Pick insisted on forward security. Engineers dug foxholes beside bulldozers, and machine gun nests guarded bridge crews. The line between builder and fighter blurred. Illness continued to sap strength. Army medical files record malaria cases still crippling units at a rate of 60 per 1,000 men per month, despite strict atabrine schedules. Jungle leeches clinging to boots and bare skin left men bleeding and infected.
One GI wrote home, "We give more blood to the leeches than the Red Cross." Despite all this, morale hardened. Soldiers knew that they were doing what no one else had done. By Christmas 1943, a convoy of 2.5-ton trucks successfully crossed the Patkai, slowly, grinding uphill in first gear, but across nonetheless. The road was still primitive, riddled with switchbacks so sharp that drivers often had to reverse to complete the turn. Yet it was a road where before there had only been elephant tracks and jungle paths. In Washington and Chongqing, news of the progress spread. Stilwell himself toured the line, praising Pick and his men for carving the future out of rock. Roosevelt's Joint Chiefs, reviewing reports, concluded that the Ledo Road, despite its cost, was becoming a strategic reality. Supplies could now trickle toward the front at Myitkyina and eventually to China. But for the engineers on the ridges of the Patkai, the achievement was less grandiose. They measured their success in hot meals eaten dry, in bridges that held after a storm, in convoys that made it through without sliding off a cliff. One sergeant summed it up in a diary, now housed at the National World War II Museum. "We don't think about China or strategy. We think about the next bend in the road. We make it, we win. That's all." By early 1944, the Patkai Range was behind them. Ahead lay the Hukong Valley of northern Burma, swamps, fever, and the Japanese in force. The worst, the men soon discovered, was yet to come.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
January 1944. The road builders descended from the Patkai into the Hukong Valley, a vast lowland stretching toward northern Burma. What had looked on maps like a flat corridor proved worse than the mountains. Endless swamp, fever-ridden jungle, and enemy troops lurking in the shadows. A medical officer later wrote, "The Patkai broke machines, the Hukong broke men." The valley was a natural trap. Rivers overflowed in broad, stagnant pools. Grass as tall as a man concealed snakes, insects, and Japanese patrols. U.S. Army meteorological notes recorded humidity levels that rarely dipped below 90%, even at night. Sweat-soaked uniforms, rotting fabric within weeks. Soldiers joked grimly that their gear had a shorter life expectancy than they did. Malaria raged unchecked. Records from the 48th Evacuation Hospital show infection rates nearing 100% in some Chinese units. Atabrine was distributed, but compliance faltered. Many soldiers believed it made them sterile. Dysentery and scrub typhus compounded the misery. In an oral history preserved at the National WWII Museum, Corporal Ray Meyer recalled, "We lost more men to the bugs and the fever than to any Japanese bullet." Yet the work pressed on. Engineers built causeways of rock and timber, raising the roadbed above the swamps. Convoys of Chinese laborers carried gravel in baskets, forming human chains that stretched for miles. Bulldozers bogged down constantly. Elephants and teams of men hauled them out with ropes. One U.S. officer noted bitterly in his log, "Every mile forward here costs a month of life." Combat sharpened as the road entered contested ground. The 18th Division, veterans of earlier campaigns in China, recognized the threat the road posed. Captured diaries from the division, later translated by Allied intelligence, reveal their orders: harass, delay, and bleed the enemy. Clashes erupted along the advancing road. Engineers often found themselves trading shovels for rifles. 13th Fighter Command debriefs from March 1944 describe P-40s strafing Japanese positions only a few hundred yards from bulldozer crews. In one incident, a work detail near Xinjiang was ambushed by a Japanese patrol. 3 engineers were killed before Chinese troops counterattacked with bayonets. Colonel Pick, furious, ordered the motto repeated: "We build by day, we fight by night." The Hukong also saw cooperation harden into necessity. Chinese divisions under General Sunlight Gen advanced alongside the engineers, clearing Japanese roadblocks in coordinated assaults. Stilwell himself directed these operations, using the road as both supply line and battlefield axis. War diaries show convoys of mules, jeeps, and trucks pushing forward immediately behind the infantry, a seamless blend of combat and construction. Bridges multiplied. Over the Jambu Bum foothills, engineers built timber trestles spanning gullies and rivers swollen with monsoon runoff. Some were destroyed within days by Japanese artillery, only to be rebuilt under fire. An engineer lieutenant later remarked, "If the infantry took a hill in the morning, we had a bridge across it by nightfall." Morale swung wildly. Soldiers cursed the mud and fever, but found pride in their progress. By May 1944, the road stretched through the Hukong Valley, linking Ledo to Xinjiang and beyond. Supply trucks now carried ammunition and food directly to frontline Chinese units. For the first time in years, Chinese soldiers in Burma received steady rations instead of living off jungle forage. But the human cost was staggering. U.S. records estimate that by the end of the Hukong phase, over 30% of all laborers and soldiers had been hospitalized at least once. Many never returned. Graves dotted the roadside, marked with simple wooden crosses that rain quickly erased. Still, the road endured. Stilwell called it the artery of victory. For the engineers who staggered out of the Hukong, gaunt from fever and scarred by months of toil, victory seemed less abstract. They measured it in the roar of engines echoing through the valley, convoys rolling where once there had been only swamp and silence. As one engineer scrawled in his diary before collapsing into a fever cot, "The Hukong took everything from us, but the road is here, and that means we won."
June 1944. As the Ledo Road pushed beyond the Hukong Valley, its destiny became tied to a single name, Maichichia. Nestled on the banks of the Irrawaddy River, Maichichia was more than a Burmese town. It was the gateway to central Burma and home to the only all-weather airfield in northern Burma. For General Joseph Stilwell, capturing Maichichia was essential. Without it, the road would dead-end in swamps. With it, the road could anchor a supply lifeline stretching from India to China. The mission fell to an unlikely combination: Morell's marauders, Chinese divisions under General Sunlight Gen, and the road engineers themselves. 13th Fighter Command records detail how the plan hinged on stealth, slipping through the jungle, cutting supply lines, and seizing the airfield before Japanese reinforcements could respond. On May 17, 1944, Morell's marauders stormed Maichichia airfield. Engineers were not far behind. Within hours of its capture, bulldozers roared onto the field, leveling craters and laying down pierced steel planking to stabilize the runway. Film footage preserved in the National Archives shows shirtless GIs swinging sledgehammers as transport planes circled overhead, eager to land. The first C-47 touched down the next day, delivering supplies that bypassed weeks of treacherous road travel. But the battle for Maichichia itself dragged on. Japanese troops held the town with grim determination, and combat records note 74 days of siege and street fighting. The engineers, though not trained for infantry combat, were pulled into the fray. When Japanese artillery shelled the airfield, road crews turned into stretcher bearers, hauling wounded men from burning revetments. One engineer's diary, later archived at the National WWII Museum, described nights when we laid gravel by day and carried rifles by night. The strategic value of the airfield was immediate.
Transport squadrons flew in supplies for the Chinese divisions, while damaged aircraft limped in for repairs instead of risking the perilous hump route over the Himalayas. The road crews, meanwhile, extended their work toward the town itself, carving a supply artery under constant threat of Japanese counterattack. Malaria and exhaustion again ravaged the ranks. Morell's marauders, already battered from months in the jungle, were decimated by disease. By July, fewer than 200 of the original 3,000 men were fit for duty. Engineers fared little better. Army medical reports record entire companies reduced to half strength. Yet Colonel Lewis Pick refused to halt construction. His directive was blunt: the road must meet the airfield before the enemy does. By August, the siege ended. Maichichia fell to Allied forces, and the engineers immediately consolidated their gains. Bridges were thrown across tributaries of the Irrawaddy, linking the new prize to the growing road network. Convoys of Chinese troops and supply trucks rolled into the shattered town, a symbol of Allied determination. For the Japanese, the loss of Maichichia was devastating. Post-war interrogation reports of Japanese officers revealed their recognition that without the airfield, northern Burma could not be held. One officer admitted when Maichichia was gone, the road to China was certain. For the engineers, the victory carried a different weight. Maichichia became a graveyard as much as a crossroads. Simple wooden crosses lined the edges of the airfield, marking where road builders, marauders, and Chinese soldiers had fallen together. In a letter home, an engineer named Private Samuel Green wrote, "We built the runway with shovels, gravel, and blood. Every plane that lands here is part of us now." With Maichichia secure, the road's future was assured. The engineers had tied their creation to a strategic hub that could sustain men, machines, and supplies on a scale never before possible in the Burma theater. Yet the road still had hundreds of miles to go, through mountains, rivers, and Japanese defenses. Still, in that summer of 1944, as the first convoy rumbled from Ledo to Maichichia, the impossible had become reality. The Ledo Road was no longer just a dream on Stilwell's maps. It was iron, stone, sweat, and sacrifice, stretching forward, mile by mile, toward China.
Late 1944. With Maichina secured, the Ledo Road pressed deeper into Burma. The goal was now clear: to link up with the original Burma Road near Wanting, across the Salween River, and re-establish a land route to China. For the first time since 1942, American trucks would be able to roll supplies overland to Chiang Kai-shek's armies. But between the engineers and that victory stood the mountains of northern Burma, the Salween River, and Japanese forces determined to block them. Colonel Lewis Pick drove his men harder than ever. War Department records note his oft-repeated phrase, "A road isn't finished when it reaches a map line, it's finished when the first truck rolls through." The trucks he envisioned carried not just fuel and ammunition, but the credibility of Roosevelt's promise to keep China in the war. The Salween itself was a monster. Fed by Himalayan glaciers, it cut a gorge thousands of feet deep. Bridging it seemed impossible, yet engineers had no choice. Using Bailey Bridge sections shipped from Calcutta and hauled by mule, they assembled steel spans in record time. Photographs preserved by the U.S. National Archives show American and Chinese soldiers working side by side, waist-deep in freezing current, bolting canals together while Japanese artillery rumbled in the hills. Chinese divisions bore the brunt of the combat. General Sun Li-Jian's men fought pitched battles along the road's projected course, clearing Japanese roadblocks ridge by ridge. 13th Fighter Command provided cover.
P-38 Lightnings diving on enemy positions as bulldozers growled forward behind advancing infantry. An engineer sergeant later recalled, "The Chinese fought, we built, and the planes kept us alive." That was the pattern. Disease remained relentless. Army medical statistics show malaria, dysentery, and scrub typhus cutting effective manpower by a third. Laborers collapsed under loads of gravel, only to be replaced by fresh recruits drawn from villages along the route. One Chinese soldier's memoir described the cycle bitterly. "We buried the sick by the roadside, then carried their baskets to keep the road alive." Despite this, morale surged as the link drew closer. By December 1944, the road had stretched more than 400 miles from Ledo. Convoys of jeeps and 6x6 trucks tested its strength, grinding through switchbacks and across trestle bridges. Stilwell, recalled to Washington that fall, never saw the final link, but his successor, General Daniel Sultan, pressed the project with equal resolve. The decisive moment came in January 1945. At Mengyu, east of Mamung, American engineers and Chinese troops of the Yunnan Expeditionary Force closed the final gap. After months of jungle, swamps, and mountains, the Ledo Road, now officially renamed the Stilwell Road, joined the old Burma Road. An eyewitness account preserved in the 1985 Pacific Theater Veterans Reunion recalls cheers echoing through the valley as the first convoys shook the dust from their tires and rolled east. The Japanese, battered and short of supplies, could only harass from the flanks. Post-war interrogations confirmed they recognized the futility of stopping the road once the Salween had been bridged. One officer admitted, "The road meant China could not be starved into surrender." The symbolism of the link-up was immense. For Chinese soldiers who had fought and bled to reopen the land route, it was proof that Allied promises had not been hollow. For the Americans, it was the tangible reward for 2 years of backbreaking labor. A convoy carrying gasoline, ammunition, and medical supplies crossed into China on February 4, 1945. War correspondents dubbed it the convoy that closed the circle. But for the men who built it, the moment was quieter. One engineer wrote home, "We drove across a bridge, shook hands with Chinese on the far side, and kept driving. No speeches, no bands, just trucks on a road we weren't supposed to be able to build." The Salween link-up proved the impossible was possible. The road that had begun as a muddy scar in Ledo now spanned rivers, jungles, and mountains. It had cost blood, sweat, and lives, but it had reopened the overland highway to China. Ahead lay the final test, keeping the road open under fire and proving that all the sacrifice had been worth it. On February 4, 1945, a convoy of 113 trucks rumbled out of Ledo, Burma, bearing supplies destined for Kunming. Painted olive drab, loaded with gasoline, food, ammunition, and medical equipment, they represented more than cargo. They were the fulfillment of Roosevelt's promise to Chiang Kai-shek and the visible proof that American engineers had built a highway through hell. The road stretched 1,079 miles from Assam to Kunming. It wound through the Hukong Valley, climbed the Patkai Mountains, crossed the Saloon, and joined the old Burma Road near Wanting. It had consumed 3 years of back-breaking labor by American engineers, Chinese divisions, and tens of thousands of local laborers. War Department records estimate more than 1,100 Americans and 15,000 Chinese and Burmese laborers died in the effort. The convoy's progress was halting. Trucks bogged in mud, broke axles on sharp rocks, and strained their engines on 20% grades. Engineers rode along, repairing culverts and shoring up bridges as they went. At every stop, villagers gathered to watch. For them, these roaring machines and their endless loads of supplies seemed like something from another world. The symbolism was not lost on Allied leaders. The New York Times called it the road that reopens China.
Stilwell, though gone from theater, was credited by journalists as its father. Colonel Lewis Pick, who had driven his men mercilessly to finish it, wrote to his wife, "The first convoy made it. The job is done. The rest is in the hands of the truckers." The Chinese received the road with a mixture of pride and skepticism. In Kunming, officials staged a celebration, but soldiers at the front wondered whether the cargo would arrive fast enough to alter their dwindling supplies. Post-war analyses from the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey confirmed their doubts. Airlift over the hump remained more efficient than the road, moving far greater tonnage by late 1945. But efficiency was never the road's sole purpose. Its true value lay in what it symbolized: Allied commitment, China's inclusion in the global war effort, and a demonstration that even in the world's worst terrain, America could build a highway where none had existed. Veterans remembered the day vividly. An engineer who had worked at Mite Gina wrote later, "We weren't hauling just gasoline, we were hauling proof. Proof to the Chinese that America kept its word. Proof to the Japanese that they couldn't choke China to death." Japanese officers interrogated in 1945 confirmed the psychological blow. One colonel admitted, "We knew when the convoy rolled that China would not collapse. Our strategy of blockade was finished." The road's legacy extended beyond wartime. Post-war interviews at the 1962 U.S.-Japanese Aviation History Symposium revealed Japanese veterans still marveling at the feat. "We could not imagine building through such terrain," one confessed. "That Americans could do so while fighting was beyond our calculation." For China, the road became a symbol of Allied partnership, even as political tensions grew. Trucks brought not just supplies, but ideas, standardization, logistics, the concept of modern highways. Chinese engineers who worked alongside Americans carried those lessons into the post-war years, influencing infrastructure development in Taiwan and the mainland alike. For the Americans, the Ledo, renamed the Stilwell Road, faded quickly from memory. By 1946, it was little used, overtaken by the air routes and abandoned as the Cold War shifted priorities. But for those who built it, its memory remained vivid. At the 1985 Pacific Theater Veterans Reunion in Hawaii, one former bulldozer operator summed it up: "We didn't build a pretty road. We built a lifeline. Every culvert, every bridge, every blasted hill was a grave marker for the men who made it." In the end, the Stilwell Road was both triumph and tragedy. Triumph because it proved that American engineers could overcome impossible terrain and deliver on a strategic promise. Tragedy because its human cost far outweighed its practical wartime value. But in the jungles of Burma, where fever claimed more men than bullets, and where steel bridges spanned rivers once thought uncrossable, it stood as the ultimate symbol of Allied determination. The road was victory written in mud, sweat, and blood. It was the road that proved abundance could be built, mile by mile, even through hell itself.